Hello and welcome. You're watching NewsX. I'm Megha Sharma, and this is the 75 years of independence that India is celebrating on this special show on Waku. With me is the Israeli ambassador, His Excellency Naor Gilon. It is about the last 30 years that India and Israel have fortified their ties. How is going to be the next 30 years and more, which is going to be the roadmap for India and Israel, going to look like? Let's discuss this in greater detail. It's good to have you, His Excellency, on this broadcast.
Thank you for having me on your show.
We are celebrating 75 years of independence for our country. Incidentally, both Israel and India were recognized as independent states in 1947 and 1948. Just about 9 to 10 months of difference. But the relationship of the Jews with India has gone on since ancient times, when they were traders who would arrive at the coasts of Kochi and Mumbai and in Gujarat up until the time the dreadful Holocaust that took place. And there were a lot of these refugees that found solace in India, and India opened up its heart and its heart. How do you, as the Israeli ambassador, look back at the relationship that India has shared with the Jews over all these decades?
When I came here, all my career was around Europe and United States. When I came here, I was very surprised to find out that the word anti-Semitism is not part of the vocabulary even here. The notion of hating the Jews in a very sick way is not here. The Jews were part and parcel of this country for many, many years, part of the society, like many other minorities. They were not different. So there were different religious minorities, even within Hinduism. So there are different fractions and beliefs and ways. And so Jews were another part of it, and they were I think, good part and a constructive part of the society. I went to visit the house and grave place of Ben-Gurion in Sde Boker in the Negev. Ben-Gurion, the leader, the first prime minister of Israel, but really the leader of the establishment of Israel, the father of the new nation, admired Gandhi, by the way. He has the picture in his bedroom in Sde Boker, in a very modest house, which is a museum today. You can see the picture of Gandhi. So he saw the Indian liberation movement as a sister movement, at the same time, the same Brits. So there was a lot of affinity, I think, there.
Absolutely, there has been a lot of affinity, and Israel and India have been natural partners with the kind of dual challenges of terrorism, of cybersecurity concerns that both countries share. But why do you think it took India and Israel to take the big next step only in the 1990s and not from the very start? And there had been quite the hiccups because India was extremely reluctant in recognizing Israel as an independent state back in 1950. So do you think at this point of time there has been this massive transition? But my question being, looking back, what withheld India from going all out in support of your country?
Yeah, you're right. It was a slow start to our relations. India acknowledged Israel in 1950, and we opened in 1953 our consulate in Mumbai, Bombay of the time, which was limited in its scope of activity. It was not a full political, and the accessibility was limited. Why? Hard to say. I think that it was internal politics in a way, but also international politics in the thinking that if you have a crisis, if you have a problem with Muslim neighbors, having Israel at the end of the day, and we suffer from that all around international organizations. We are one country, very small country, we must say also, small in population and in size. We have one vote in the UN, and over the years, the Muslim countries in the world are about 50 countries, and they have followers also. So it's a big voting bloc, and I guess that there was also a calculation of support that India needed in the international arena when it had conflicts with Pakistan and stuff like that. So I think this was one element probably of the reluctance to make warm relations. And in the 90s, there was a change in the world. Mm-hmm. And the change in the world was also after Madrid conference, and a few countries re-established or upgraded their relations with Israel. China did more or less the same time. But we must say that even before that, we already had defense cooperation.
Yes.
So Israel and India were cooperating in the defense field very closely. I think this was also an incentive or a bridge or something that enabled the upgrading of the relations. And since the 90s, I would say that in addition to defense, the agriculture cooperation became the second basis of our relation. We have about 30 centers of excellence all around 13 states, and we will have closer to 40 by the end of the year. We are doing a lot of work together there.
Yeah.
But what happened is that the big change, there were visits along the way of President Ezer Weizmann and Prime Minister Sharon, but probably the big change happened in 2017 when Prime Minister Modi came to Israel. Netanyahu hosted him, and they elevated the relations to strategic partnership. So this was a tremendous change. And I think that, and a year later, Netanyahu came here, January 2018, Netanyahu came here. And I think that the definition was important, but the substance is much more important, because now we cannot speak of two bases to our relations. It's multi-based. We are cooperating in every field one can imagine, I think. So
organically present, the people-to-people initiative that has been commenced by the Modi government 2014. I think that's been an impetus, but I think these elements were already there, organically present. And like we mentioned about, 300 AD, the history is there. So there's this mutual appreciation when it comes to people, when it comes to cultures. But I'm going to go back to the hesitancy with which India first started off its ties with Israel. But it was Israel that was steadfast. It had a clarity of mind in terms of backing and supporting India, come what may, whether it were the nuclear test sanctions that India was facing, particularly from the United States of America, back in the 1990s, 98, I think the Pokhran test that happened. And talk about Kargil, again, we had the defense systems and technology from Israel that had been flown in. And this diplomatic and the defense and military support goes on to show that there was a conscious effort from the Israeli government side and the foreign policy to structure this relationship that we are enjoying the fruits of currently.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. Ben Gurion, by the way, it started there in 1948, I think, or something. After there was 47, after the acknowledgement, I think it was of U.S. and Soviet Union of the State of Israel. He said the most important next acknowledgement would be from India. It came only a couple of years later, but I think that the importance towards India and the sympathy towards India were always there. The limitations, as you said, came from the Indian side, not from the Israeli side. Yeah. We were always happy to cooperate. And I'm very happy that we are beyond, we went even further beyond that. In a way, I think that Prime Minister Modi was opening the way to others, because look at the Abraham Accords. What is the message by Prime Minister Modi? He said, in general, coming to Israel and elevating the intimacy and the relations.
I'll come to the Abraham Accords and the trilaterals and the multilaterals that are being built at this point in time in West Asia. But going by the chronology with regards to the 1990s, India opening up, there was disintegration of the Soviet Union. India required an arms treaty with an economy that was going to have no holds barred reciprocity. And thereby, when it comes to the traditional defense partners, Israel is currently at number 3. How are the Make in India and Make with India initiatives further going to push this to the next level?
Yes. I think that the Make in India, first of all, is the right program for India, in the sense that India, and you look what's happening now in Ukraine and other places, you want the ability to be independent, and you don't want to rely on anyone when it comes to your defense needs. So I think the program is right. I believe, and I also heard it from the Prime Minister Modi, when I went to see him with the Minister of Defense, that he really believes in the Make in India, the importance, and he sees Israel as the ultimate partner, probably, because we have an advantage. We are relatively small. So we are the most advanced in some of the defense technologies, most advanced in the world, like in defense, like in UAVs, but at the same time, we are very small and agile. So our ability to cooperate and also probably the intimacy between the countries. When it comes to defense and Make in India, you have to have trust.
Fair enough. In view of this quadrilateral that has just been formed for economic purposes, which is the I2U2, Israel, India, United States of America, and UAE. Now, while this is at a nascent stage, the first meeting has taken place in July this year, and with the focus areas being trade, maritime security, cybersecurity. If you could give us, an in-depth analysis of how this is going to help further build India and Israel relations and these multilaterals that we are at this point of time beginning to forge within West Asia. You mentioned about accords, the Abraham Accords 2020 under Trump, the negotiating. Is this allowing Israel to rebuild its relations with the Middle Eastern world?
I think that the Abraham Accords are, or the I2U2, Abraham Accords led to the I2U2, the ability to create it, are very important. We see that the international systems are in many ways paralyzed because of differences between the major players. So very hard to reach consensus and be effective about it. What is really interesting about this initiative of the I2U2 is that, first of all, we are speaking only on economics, because everyone is trying to say, Western Quad, the previous different names that are given. It's not any Quad in the sense that if we would bring in each one the political concerns or regional concerns we have, probably China would come in as a concern and Iran would come in as a concern, and not necessarily it can disturb the work. So we are putting everything out. We are just going in an idea of having the governments facilitate for private sector in these 4 countries to cooperate, each one bringing in his own advantages, his own technology, his own knowledge, his own financing, commerce, whatever is needed. And look, the first 2 projects that are going to be declared and implemented in India, both of them, are about food security and energy, green energy and energy security, we can call it. So it's trying to make the world a better place. And what is interesting, look at the 4 countries. We have no common borders. So we are not bordering each other. We just have common interests and common values. And that's what we are trying to do here, to try and make the region better, the world better. The importance is huge because India and Israel have wonderful potential, and we are working all the time now we grew our trade without defense, grew to over $6 billion now, which is a nice number. It's for Israel is a small country at the end of the day, so it's quite a nice figure, about 50% increase in the last few years. But the potential trilaterally makes it much, much bigger. We can approach the whole world together. The abilities of UAE and India in going to third markets, the finance that can come from UAE. So I think the size market of India, the total potential here is wonderful. And having the Americans is always good on board, Yeah.
I think having the Americans right from the 1990s up until 2022 has been a boon for this bilateral relationship that India and Israel currently share. And since we talk about various other arenas besides defense that has been traditional bulwark for the relationship that both the countries share, you talked about solar energy. There has been a deal that has been signed between both the nations very, very recently. You mentioned about it. You talk about cybersecurity, where a number of Israeli startups at this point of time have gotten into our country, and there's heavy investment in that regard as well. Water management and agriculture, you rightfully pointed out, has been an issue for India, and Israel has come out in full support, and particularly with your desalination plants, which have been of massive help in figuring out the water shortage problems that India perennially has been facing, especially in terms of the large sector still in the agriculture market, a large economy, large population still in the agriculture market. Are there also steps now being taken towards these directions? What are there funding that has at this point of time been allocated? I think, and you keep witnessing all these programs that are also being conducted by the Israeli embassy, one after the other, whether it is the COVID vaccinations, whether it is the propagation of COVID certificates between both the nations, easy travel, tourism. These are peripheral subjects, but also again important.
Yeah, that's the thread of the relations. At the end of the day, when I said that it's a multi-based relations, not only on two bases of agriculture and the defense. So we are trying, that's the real thread of people to people. You want it to be direct relations. What we as government have to be, we have to be facilitators. At the end of the day, the private sector knows how to do the work much better than we do. Yeah. So, for example, in our embassy, we have the only water attaché in the world. It's very unique in Delhi. And his job is to help design integrative water design. So not only one solution. So you take a region and you try to design something for the region that will include you take the potential of the region when it comes to if there is a lot of rain, how do you do, you collect the rain, finding the right agriculture that will go with the type of water you have, saving water, etc., etc. So that's one example. We are involved here in many areas. Israeli company, Tower Semiconductors, is part of an MOU signed in Karnataka for building a semiconductor factory. The investment coming from Indian side, by the way, is about $3 billion. So it's a big thing, and it's the cutting edge technology. Just to make, you mentioned some Israeli companies. The biggest, to the best of my knowledge, the biggest Israeli employer in India, in Pune, there is Amdocs, an Israeli company who does billing for cellular companies, etc. They are employing 14,000 people in the high-tech sector. So there is a lot going on. It's very easy to connect, for Indians and Israelis to connect. It's very natural, very easy, and culture-wise and otherwise. And I think that the potential is huge. We as embassies, we need to facilitate and not disturb. That's what we are trying to do, to make the initial connections and let the private sector do its work on both countries. Absolutely. And this is the example of Adani going to Israel. And by the way, most of the big Indian companies have in Israel some kind of investment representation to look for technologies, to invest in high tech. So it's already there for years, and it's happening without us. Because I think it's because the mutual appreciation and image is positive. So they want to come, and we Israelis want to come here. So we are working all the time to try, and this is our challenge, by the way, because I came here as ambassador less than a year ago, and I came in a situation where the relations are in a certain peak, I think. And the question is, when you come out of COVID and everything, and we are summarizing 30 years, how do we build the ability to have the continuation of this huge growth for the next 30 years.
With the same pace.
With the same pace, and especially the pace of the last few years, which was tremendous. I think it's there. My successors in 10 years will be able to assess whether we did a good job. And my very good colleague, Sanjeev Singla, your ambassador to Tel Aviv, who is doing a wonderful job there too.
No, His Excellency, you're doing a fantastic job. Like you said, facilitators and not disturbers. Bring about disruption, but in terms of innovation, in terms of trade, in terms of people-to-people contact, cultural connect as well. We're talking about trade, and there have been talks that have been going on with regards to the free trade agreement. Now, India has gone ahead and signed the FTAs with several other nations in the West. There are a lot of talks that have been going on with the United States of America, UK, Australia, that has already been done. Strategic cooperative partnership that has been signed. Where is India and Israel? At which place is it? Is it a time to implement it? Finally, sign the MOUs and associate member MOAs, and finally let the ball roll.
I hope soon. We are hoping to have another round. There was a delegation already from the Indian side in Israel for negotiations and negotiation rounds for a couple of days. I hope that there will be later this month a delegation from Israel. It's technicalities. The truth is, I think that haven't, our Prime Minister Bennett, previous Prime Minister, was supposed to visit here, and 3-4 days before the visit, he contracted COVID and had to cancel his visit.
Mm-hmm.
I think that, visits are always an incentive for the bureaucracies in both countries to make it faster. So the lack of a visit now is, in a way, a little bit of a lack of, because there are pressures on both people. The same people in both countries are doing all the trade agreements.
Yeah.
And now they have to prioritize. And sometimes a high-level visit is a good reason to prioritize.
I'm going to come back to the very challenging Palestine issue that continues to be a point of conflict. I don't know if conflict is the right term between India and Israel. You tell me. With the UNGA and the UNSC, there have been a number of resolutions that were passed in the recent times. Out of the 4 resolutions, on 3 of the resolutions, India decided to side with Palestine. The 4th resolution, which was about the human rights atrocities against Palestine, India decided to abstain from voting. How do you look at this complexity with which India and Israel started off with their relationship, and in 2022, where they stand?
I don't think it's an obstacle. I think it's an issue, but the Palestinian issue is an issue being around for a very long time with many, many countries. But it's not a block on bilateral relations. It doesn't mean, our countries, we agree on, probably if you would take your prime minister, foreign minister with our foreign minister, they will speak probably on foreign policy. There will be 95% of agreement on issues, how we see them and how we share them. Of course, there is never 100% agreement. I think that we are, for example, more hawkish on the Iranian issue. And we are mature enough in our friendship and relations to trust each other, to know each other's interests, to know that we will not harm each other's interests. And that's how each one, we have our issues, we discuss them openly, but it's not an obstacle, it's a discussion. Each one trying to convey to the other side. On Iran, we try to convey our, our feelings about the destabilization of Iran to the region and the threat to the region, the nuclear part, etc. If you have issues, you will raise issues with us if you think that, you have concerns or you have. But again, the Palestinian issue is there. It's not disappearing. The Palestinians are peoples who are living in under the Palestinian Authority, and it's a fact. But it's not an obstacle anymore. It's another topic we have to discuss, and we do discuss it.
Okay. I'll talk about the New World Order. There was a massive shift with the 1990s, the Cold War that ended in the disintegration of Soviet Union. It's 2022 now, 3 years after COVID. There is a shift again, and there is a global New World Order. With the Ukraine-Russia crisis in East Europe has further shifted the onus, I would particularly say, in South Asia and India. And in terms of the negative publicity that China has been gaining notoriously with regards to its expansionist policies, with regards to South China Sea, with regards to this visit that is being made by Nancy Pelosi in Taiwan and China showcasing its aggressiveness. Are there creation of blocks that can now be anticipated in West Asia? Like you said, speaking about a concern that you hold with regards to Iran, India has continued to question the intent of China, whether it is the line of actual control, whether it is its association with Pakistan, the CPEC projects, the new Silk Route that it's creating. Would the creation of these strategic military blocks as well, on the lines of perhaps Quad or an AUKUS, would be something of an inevitability in the coming future?
It's a very good question. Before the Ukraine crisis, we hoped that we are going to live in a world where force will be less used, and economic warfare, technological warfare, everything around that will be the dominant element. And we saw that we are back to people shooting at each other rather than countries having more sophisticated battles on economy, on trade, there will be adjustments to be held. Now we'll have to see how the world realigns. And again, I hope, for example, that nuclear issues are a part of history, that countries who hold nuclear weapons see that only as a deterrence and defense element, not as an offensive or aggressive element, and that, you know, we will fight over who sells more and who manufactures more and not kill people. By nature, people fight. I guess this is human nature, but hopefully it will be directed at not too negative things.
Okay. And then again, where does the balance of power lies is the crucial question over here, with the fight for the global hegemony at this point in time very, very rampant between the United States of America and China.
It's very early.
Yeah.
It's an early stage of this, I think.
Yeah. And finally, Ambassador, my last question to you before I conclude this interview, a message that you would like to give to the people of India and to the people of Israel, and in terms of this mutual cooperation that has been painstakingly built over the years.
Yeah, first of all, since you are towards the Independence Day, a day of independence, so I think it's the first thing I should do is congratulate our Indian brothers and sisters on this happy day. I'm very happy that we are, as you said before, we realized our potential. Our friendship is now also part of our relations. So for many years, we were not there, as we discussed.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, His Excellency, for joining us on this telecast, sharing your views and celebrating these 30 years that Israel and India have achieved thus far in the kind of milestones and landmarks that they have achieved. And here's hoping for not just 30, but 130 and many more years to come with regards to the kind of natural allies we have become, and explore more and more capabilities and opportunities that each side has to provide for the other.
Thank you. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
For more such videos, subscribe to the NewsX YouTube channel, hit the bell icon.